Today on r/AskReddit. What's a job that's romanticized but in reality sucks? Anything in modern day publishing. How many television shows and movies must I watch where the plucky young upstart graduates from college and gets a job at the magazine or newspaper of their choice and is respected and can make a living? The pay sucks, you're in constant danger of being laid off when your pub folds, usually, and it's usually a pretty corporate environment where you're tasked with multiple jobs for little hope of advancement. The names high up on the mastheads are usually those of rich people, and it's because they started off rich and could afford to stay in the industry. I got an offer for my dream internship once, at a publishing company right out of college. Unpaid. In New York. Yeah, I can afford to move to a place with 5 times the cost of living than where I am for a full-time job for no money. Sometimes I wonder where I'd be if I jumped at the chance. Then I realize, homeless in New York, Sex in the City is the worst for this. She's a semi-regular columnist in a magazine and that's it. She barely works, and has tons of money to travel and go around. It's like her job barely exists. Yeah, to live her lifestyle in NYC she would have to be making $200 to $300K per year. How much does a semi-regular columnist in a magazine make in reality? Any idea, anyone? I'm genuinely curious how much they were off base. Couple grand a month if it's a top magazine. No benefits either cuz she'd be a freelancer. I keep thinking of 50 Shades of Grey series and how she gets promoted to assistant editor just after finishing her internship at the publishing house. Like, what? How? Were there really no other people in that entire publishing house that could take over? Came here for this one as a novelist, signed with my first literary agent at 16, flopped, signed with a new one at 19, flopped. Got me into a lot of circles with other writers, agents, and editors as friends. A few of my best friends now have multi-book deals with a big 5 and they're nearly suicidal because of it. The deadlines are way more demanding than people think. Imagine write this book in 3 weeks, edit it in 1, then don't hear from your editor for 3 months. The pay is bad. Yes, even for the successful authors with 3 to 5 books out of a big 5, you ultimately don't get a ton of say in anything after contracts are signed. You have insane obligations because you're essentially forced to be your own publicist as a newbie. It's a nightmare. And on top of all that, fun fact, most early novelists are also ghostwriting under pen names outside their genre at the same time because 1, it's a way to make money, 2, it's so hard to publish outside your genre once you get signed for something. Now, even though publishing novels was my biggest dream in my entire life, I can honestly say I'm thankful it hasn't happened for me and probably won't. All those dreams coming true stories usually have a depressed, terrified, stressed AF writer behind the shiny covers they had no input in. And being a novel writer is even worse, these days. Unless you get super lucky, you are responsible for most of your own promotion and editing. Most publishers don't pay very well, and the market is so saturated, it takes a lot of luck and even more hard work to stand out even the slightest bit. Yup, I fought so hard to land a job at a daily paper in a mid-size market, then got it and burned out so quickly. I was insanely overworked, and a lot of the people you have to interview don't like you or the institution you're writing for. It's often thankless work. My parents were both veteran journalists who built their careers during the golden era of newspapers, back when they were flush and could afford to hire enough employees. It didn't last though. My mum, a copy editor, was laid off in the early 2000s in one of the first rounds of substantial cuts. Worth noting that she was also pregnant when she was laid off. My dad made it up the ranks only to get laid off after nearly 30 years with the paper. A few years away from retirement. I'm glad I dipped out. Most daily papers have been bought by giants like Gannett. I'm glad New York Times and WAPO exist, but newspapers are a dying breed. After a little over a year, I quit and made the shift to PR/marketing. The current generation of reporters are entering the field with a delayed impression that the job they get will be what it was 20 or sometimes even 30 years ago. It's not what it once was. It's thankless, unforgiving, brutal and honestly kinda gross. I personally don't miss it one bit when I consider all the parts as a whole. Glad you have found success elsewhere. 100%. I have a journalism degree and in my final year, one of my instructors, who is also a working journalist, said that your reward for being a fantastic journalist was to maybe not get laid off at some point in the near future. Also, the pay is terrible. I got offered $25K a year from a paper when I graduated, and the job required me to file like 10 stories a day and also own and maintain a car on top of that low salary. I said no. The only good thing I will say is that a good journalism degree is useful in a lot of fields. I've worked as a history researcher, technical writer, and now I work as a freelance writer and marketer. So I wouldn't dissuade someone from going into the field, but I would definitely recommend that they stay open-minded about the exact job they want to have. I strongly suspect being a spy doesn't involve half as many high-tech gadgets and spontaneous sexual intercourse as I've been led to believe. One former member of the CIA said the most unbelievable thing about James Bond was that he never had to file an expense report. Super boring and lonely. Keep your head down with your local, usually bad, job you're placed in and write reports at night. For years. Typically never leads to anything. My father worked in intelligence during the Cold War. He and one other would often be in the field for days at a time taking pictures of Russian trains/transport vehicles. They did however have the most high-tech gadgets of the era, specifically cameras, radios, modified vehicles etc. Mine was on the other side of the conflict. Disguised as a fishing boat they had to spy on US submarines and planes. High-tech gadgets involved. Pair of binoculars. He did take a lot of cool pics though. I almost joined the CIA at one point, got really far in the process but eventually washed out. Most people working there are a bunch of academic types working in an office cubicle writing reports or coding. It's less gadgets and sex and more sitting at a desk writing a report on the economy of Kazakhstan, and I've heard it described as grad school with a security clearance. And even the operations guys for the most part are more about pretending to be a random staffer in an embassy somewhere while they meet with a specific foreigner in a hotel room to talk to them and learn information than trying to take down a villain in a volcano lair bent on world domination. I'm a private investigator and during the PI classes I had ex-FBI agents show the gadgets he's used to collect information. In reality majority of PI cases are just clients who think their significant other is cheating on them. So just following them to the gym or whatever. My cousin used to be a private investigator. He said most of the time his jobs were following people around who were suspected of committing workman's comp fraud. I remember reading about a spy who had to pose as a homeless guy in Russia, and to maintain his cover he had to do drugs, piss and poop himself, and go weeks without contact from his handlers to not arouse suspicion. It's not a very glamorous lifestyle. Lawyer. Number of historic, life-changing, precedent-setting cases participated in, 0. Number of angry, self-entitled, abusive clients wanting to screw each other over, 842. Number of pages of paperwork that sucked up free time and social life, 84,836. The movies and shows rarely show the soul-draining task of doc review. Computer game development, especially testing. That is the butt end of an industry that is mostly butt. I was gonna say video game development, too. People think it's all about creativity, and making something cool and fun, when the reality is a lot of bull turd. Treat them like turd, use them like toilet paper. Indie game development, when it's just you and barely enough people to fill your car, that's amazing joyous fun. AAA game development is where hope, happiness, and creativity go to die. You're burned at both ends, wrung out of every ounce of joy you have ever had, and used like a 10-year-old hard sock. And management doesn't care, because they open their door, and there are 1,000 kids willing to fight a bare-knuckle brawl just for the interview. So why should management care about you? You want joy in game dev? Do it yourself. Source, worked for a commercial during the Super Bowl AAA game dev company. I will suck Richard for food before I go back to that life ever again. And in indie development, there's a 95% chance the work you've put your soul the last 3 years will be simply forgotten in a week as it didn't gain popularity. I went for a job interview at Rockstar. One of the guys interviewing me brought up dedication and claimed that he had skipped his own grandmother's funeral in order to get GTA 5 out on time. I have never wanted a job less. I work with someone who worked on Red Dead Redemption 2 and she told me she was doing 60 to 80-hour weeks for like a year. She told me she doesn't have enough time to do a certain task, but doesn't mind putting in overtime. I promptly told her no, you don't need to do overtime here. If it doesn't get done that's on production for not planning properly. I believe it. I worked like that at Monolith Productions making games half as interesting as Red Dead Redemption 2. 8 months of solid crunch. Never saw my wife. Every time I drove home it was dark outside and started to question why I even went home in the first place. Bad company. Good games, but bad company. Very happy about where I work now, though. The key is to stay away from AAA game devs. They simply have too much pressure. Look at what gamers expect, lol. Can confirm. Spent 23 years in the games industry, started on PlayStation 1 and made PlayStation games for every generation including PS5, Also Xbox, Switch, PC, and VR. Most don't make it that long. I think the average is something around 10 years. I've moved so many times, 13 states and 19 moves. Once people get older, the long hours, constant crunch, and ungodly amount of stress takes a toll on your physical and mental health. Not to mention, as you get older you may want to get married and have kids. It's not fair to them or your spouse when you are never home, little job security, and frequently moving. Hard to buy a house because you never know if you're gonna have to pack up and move on 2 weeks' notice, many times cross-country. I spent over 10 years never signing more than a 6-month lease, because you never know. Not fair to the kids having to switch schools every few years, etc. Don't get me wrong, it can be a lot of fun, work with amazing people, travel the globe if you're lucky, but it's exhausting. I got shingles from stress at 29, and was happy because it meant I had to stay home for 3 weeks. Not to mention the constant learning on your own time. New software comes out frequently, eliminating old techniques and creating new ones, so you're always spending nights and weekends brushing up. New generations of hardware changes everything you knew and makes it obsolete, and royalties used to be a big incentive, but they really don't exist anymore. Not to mention, you could be promised fat royalty checks, work on something for 5 years, then the game ships and you're laid off. If you aren't still employed when the royalties roll around 6 months later, you get none. Also, if you work for years on a project that gets cancelled, you aren't allowed to show what you did during that time in your portfolio, so it's completely lose-lose situation and have no way to show new potential studios your progress during the past several years. This is why so many artists spend nights and weekends on personal projects, so if shit does hit the fan, you have something to show. Don't get me started on quality assurance, they have it the roughest. Playing a broken game 12 hours a day, getting blamed for all sorts of things that aren't their fault, paid barely more than minimum wage, and frequently contracts so no benefits. My brother-in-law was a dev for a big studio, but he got his start in the industry cutting his teeth in QA. I think I was around 12 or 13 at the time, and when he told me he tests video games for a living, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. He promptly told me that it sucked ass because you're just glued to the screen for the entire day and you can't even really enjoy the game for what it is, because your job is literally to find bugs/glitches, so mostly you have to do mundane/repetitive stuff instead of actually playing the game the way a regular consumer would. Yep, my brother-in-law worked as a tester. He said one of his early jobs was to go through a Dora the Explorer game, jumping at every wall to see if there were any places you could fall through the map. Oh damn. This has been a dream career of mine for as long as I can remember. I guess I gotta get more original ambitions. The thing about video game testing is that you're playing the game long before it's complete, and long before it's fun to play. Also, you may hit the jackpot and be able to test the next new breakthrough IP, but Barbie Horse Adventure needs testers as well. Finally, you're not just playing games all day, you're playing the same game all day every day. And you're not just playing, you need to document what you find. All for absolute turd pay. You're also not playing the game sometimes. You're not testing the main quest the whole time, you need to mess with the inventory to try and break it, you need to run into walls to find clipping. It's really boring work. I always had a strong suspicion that it wasn't just playing FPS games before their release all day with your co-workers. Play a FPS match with co-workers. Take a shot, passes through enemy's head. Everybody stops what they're doing. Spend an hour trying to reproduce the bug. Same shot, same weapon, same position. Finally get it. Test every other weapon and every other character to get as much information as possible. Write up detailed bug report, send to developers. Get response, we can't reproduce it. Have to go up to developer section and spend an hour of their time reproducing it. Bug gets classified as D, known bug not going to be fixed. Go home for the day. Although it's not as fun as a lot of people romanticize it, it doesn't seem too bad. I might be being naive, so please correct me if I'm wrong. I thought that initially after reading that comment, but the more I think about it, the more I can see the tedium in it. Firstly, you don't get to choose the game. Could be some terrible game you'd never give the time of day to if you were actually playing it. Secondly, from what many here are saying, it's a full-time job and then some, so it isn't just sit down and screw around for a few hours, it's do that same thing day in, day out. Thirdly, it's low pay and likely the crunch hours that exist in that industry that has been well publicized. From what others are saying in here, it also sounds like you don't necessarily even choose what you focus on breaking, you are assigned a certain focus. I also would think there's a different mentality as a player when you try to find exploits because it's a way to get ahead of others, or it's forbidden or not intended for you to do. You're not supposed to break the game like that, so if you find something, it's kind of like you just did something that a lot of developers, testers etc. missed and didn't want you to do. If that's your job though, all those motivations just melt away. Veterinarian. People think it's playing with puppies all day, but you see some really disturbing things and people can be awful. You don't make nearly as much as you should. You're having to do the jobs of like 10 human doctors combined plus knowing how to work on different species. The suicide rate for vets is through the roof. Someone told me that when you watch someone slowly killing their pet because they won't listen and think they know better, it's just so heartbreaking. Agree, there's two worst bits to vet med. 1. The emotional blackmail. If you loved animals, you'd treat Fluffy for his multicentric cancer and heart failure for $5. 2. The number of people who leave their animals too long and won't accept that death is coming and putting their animal to sleep is the best thing for their animal rather than letting them suffer. Sister is a vet. People will straight up ruin someone's career because they're emotional. One vet was pushed to suicide due to online review bombings. Approximately 17% of veterinarians have contemplated suicide, and veterinarians are 2.7 times more likely than the general public to die by suicide, often using the same drugs used to end the suffering of their animal patients. And they don't make nearly as much as people think. I've read somewhere suicide rate is high among veterinarians, but here, can confirm. I just lost a classmate to suicide a couple of months ago, and I'm up to about a half dozen acquaintance or closer relationship vets that I've lost to it. I'm only 6 years out of vet med school, so pretty much losing someone I know to suicide on an average of about one per year. It's awful. I'm sorry to hear that. What do you suppose is the leading cause? The emotional toll of taking care of sick/injured animals? Honestly, I think the emotional toll of working with sick animals is the smallest part of it. Pretty much everyone in the industry has rationalized the fact that we can't save every animal and that euthanasia is a compassionate end to life when we've run out of good medical options. The biggest issue is that people suck, for lack of a nicer way to put it. Vet med takes the worst of retail job altered by being a very customer-facing job, but then adds in the wrinkles of our clients usually being stressed/upset already, their animal is sick, when we interact with them, and the fact that we're the punching bag for a broken economic system that we have no actual control over. In human medicine there are economic safety nets to ensure that, sort of, we have plenty of issues in the US on the human side for this too. People can get access to medical care that they need regardless of their economic situation. In vet med our clients need to be able to pay for care out of pocket, and that often leads to medical decisions being made on economic terms and clients flinging blame on the workers who have zero control over what things cost. Modern medical care is fundamentally expensive to provide. A hysterectomy on a human costs north of $40,000 in the US, whereas I'll do a nearly identical over-ear hysterectomy surgery on a dog, spay, for literally 1% of that cost. We make care as absolutely cheap as we can, but we can't change the fundamental costs of things like anesthetic medications, pain medications, sutures, surgical monitors, and so forth. There is a floor to what it costs to provide modern medical care, and vet med pretty much sits on that floor to the point where everyone in vet med makes approximately 1/3 of what their direct counterparts, vet techs versus registered nurses, vets versus physicians, in human medicine make. However, because people are paying out of pocket and we're the ones handing them the bill, we're greedy, evil buttholes who would rather make $1 than save Fido's life or any of the other variations of that I've had flung at me. It sucks. One of my childhood friends always dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. He made that dream a reality. Now he is miserable, depressed and stressed out. He's still a great person and I'm proud to call him my friend, but he is a mere shadow of the person he once was. Don't forget the low pay. Edit. I should point out, while the main vet who owns the practice usually makes pretty good money, all of the other staff make turd for money, usually. The other vets that work at the clinic are mostly paying off vet school loans as well, so lots of their money goes to that. Also, the owner of the clinic is liable for any lawsuits, which yes, people do try to sue over their pet, and similar student debts to medical school, yet the poor pay doesn't help vets like human doctors get. Sad face. Doctor. Fantasy, I make lots of money, everyone respects me. Reality, I watch people die every day, work exhausting 12-hour shifts, have crippling depression and multiple addictions. Being one, I can't stress this enough. 1. Pays aren't out of this world for everyone. To earn more you gotta work more shifts. And even then there is so much taxes and fees we have to pay: license retention, competence, union, etc. 2. A lot of shifts. Mainly to cover for perpetual staff shortages. Night shifts are the worst and take several days to recover from. Your family and social life go to turd. 3. The constant threat of litigation or complaints from even the most innocuous things. The worst is when staff itself puts complaints without addressing the issue at hand. 4. Seeing sick people daily does affect you. Seeing them die does too. Seeing the young die is the worst. It's heartbreaking. Worse than the above is telling the relatives they are going to or have died. It's not easy even after the 100th or 1000th time of doing it. 5. Hospital administration red tape, politics and bureaucracy. Every hospital has a garbled policy to suit its needs. The administration of a hospital is best described as overconfident, crisis-riddled incompetence. 6. Bullying by superiors, put-downs by superiors, not being supported by superiors during interdepartmental issues. Disputes with departments on admissions or care. There are doctors who have god complexes and lose their minds. 7. Perpetual studying, keeping up to date with guidelines and research, exams and career advancement. We constantly have to refresh our knowledge on a mandatory basis for several vital topics, resuscitation, sepsis, etc. In my experience, it's not so much about watching people die every day, but being managed by non-clinician encounters that continually pressure me to see a patient every 15 minutes all day long with no time to document. Constantly being pulled away from seeing a patient by some non-patient facing duty, always feeling behind, always feeling at risk of missing something important and hurting someone / getting sued. Yep, nothing better than being told to do clinically unsafe amounts of work by people with no liability for the results. Don't forget insurance companies telling us what we can and cannot prescribe to our patients, because what do we know? I've had to spend hours on the phone, then getting a phone appointment with an insurance medical director, to try to get psoriasis biologics approved, even when I know it's the best agent for my patient. The director, being a retired non-specialist who eventually capitulates, but the time spent to get the medication I as a specialist wanted from the start, and the hoops. I'm a doctor, palliative care, came here to say this. And I have amazing hours / pay. It just eats at me. I get home and don't have the emotional energy to do anything. It's a reality nobody tells you on purpose. Not the university, because they want to have enough students. Not we docs, because we don't want to disillusion the youth and slander our profession. It can be a very cool profession full of purpose, especially if you are an expert in a field, then I'd argue it is a craft. Like playing music or woodworking, you could do the intricate examinations, tests and findings. But the day-to-day work, especially organization and administration, does suck badly. Well, this thread is insanely depressing. Are there any good fields to go into? Lol. The lesson is that a job is a means to support your lifestyle. If it depresses you, then don't put all of your self-worth into your career identity. Strive for work-life balance, and develop some hobbies. I'm a systems engineer. I write dry technical documents. My job is boring, tedious, and unglamorous, and it is precisely what I want and the best job I've ever had. The pay is very good, I can work from home, there is no stress, and I do 5 hours of work a day, tops. The problem with romanticized jobs is that there is so much competition for them that employers can get away with paying turd and having terrible work conditions because there is always someone else in line to replace you. Dream jobs are for suckers. Any job will have its bad parts, because real life is just like that. These romanticized depictions of jobs will usually portray them as being great all the time. Thus, almost every job will fail to live up to an idealized depiction of it. The trick isn't finding a job with no bad parts, it's finding a job you like enough that the bad parts aren't enough to stop you from doing it, because there are enough good parts to keep you enjoying it.